On this edition of Native Report, we view the dreamlike art of Rabbett Before Horses Strickland. We interview author Eric Reddix about legendary Ojibwe Chief Joe White. And from this week's Native Report archives, a tribute to the late chairman of the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians, Richard Milanovich. We also learn something new about Indian country and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community and the Blandin Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder. The imagery and subject matter of artist Rabbett Before Horses Strickland are as epic as the canvases he paints. His art has been compared to Renaissance masters, and rightly so, as the visions and dreamscapes he paints are timeless.
It is 2 days before a retrospective exhibition by Rabbett Before Horses Strickland opens to the public, and he is nearly done with the installation of his paintings. Rabbett attempted his first oil painting as a young man.
It was a painting of Zeus throwing a thunderbolt. It's about 4 by 4 feet. It was big. And that was it. I forgot who it was by. It was a copy. Botticelli, Velasquez, Peter Paul Rubens, all those guys. I just copied them constantly, early on. Picasso, Dali, Duchamp. At one point I painted on glass. I used to paint a portrait, the front, and then I would do the back side of them. And you could look through it and see 2 different views. Then I started doing it on canvas, painting both sides. That was kind of interesting. I think I was 19 then. The whole family painted. My mother, her sisters, her brothers, they all painted. And one was a commercial artist up here in Minneapolis. He's just immersed in it, Grew up in it. It was easy. Glad my mother supported it. Right? Kept it going. And when I was young, bought all those materials and kept it going. She was a painter and did a lot of things, kind of like my cousin does. My cousin does lots of different novelty things, with birch bark and stuff. And they lived out here when there was a one-room schoolhouse in Bayfield when they were little, and then they moved down to Minneapolis. Their mother died, and then they went in the Navy and moved out to San Francisco, I guess. But they were all out. The brothers were artists. Everybody was an artist, so it was pretty easy to get into it, I think. Seeing all that. And she was really good. Always putting out. Didn't have a lot of money, but she'd give me supplies and stuff, So that was good. She kept me going. Probably wouldn't have been doing it if it wasn't for her.
Much of Rabbett's artwork weaves the fantastic tales of Ojibwe cultural hero Nanabuju with even more fantastic imagery. People and turtles fly. The sun is captured and moved through the sky, and the wind constantly blows.
In my 20s, I used to copy, I used to do the Greek mythology. And I read a few stories with Nanabuju and, shape-shifting into a rabbit. So I thought, well, that's just going to go right over for a satyr, same thing. So I just started getting into, like, the creation story is a long story. The shut-eye dance is a long story. And there's a lot of material there, and nobody's painting it. And those 13 turtles that are flying around, they represent the months of the old Earth calendar, 13 months for planting. There's a lot of surrealist qualities in my stuff. I know I got the antlers on the Nokomis, but that's for age, and wisdom. And Nanabuju has those. That's very important to me. He's in even if I do something political, he's in it. He's in every one. Or something that I've made up, like Star Makers over there. He's in it. You know, I make sure he's there, and I make sure that he's known more as an emissary from the Gitche-Minidoon, not a trickster. Because I think he's a planner of a new medicine, a collective consciousness that'll come eventually. It's expressionism, you know. It's a mid-form of expressionism. I mean, it's no reference. I don't look at anything. So when you look at something, you can get a lot of detail. But this is just coming out of me.
Almost all of Rabbett's paintings are allegorical, such as the right to consciousness.
I just wanted to, in my way, show, because of the, you know, there's a lack of film footage, you know, like the Holocaust. We don't have that. And there's very few photos. And it kind of, I don't want people to let that take away from the fact that there was a genocide. And that's what that's about. All the women and children in the middle. And, you know, they got their flags, you know. And then again, it's a spiritual battle. The eyes of the dead are coming out. What Gitche-Minidoon is bringing them out. Spontaneity is really alive in these things. The first thing I put in is the black. It takes 2 coats of black. So I think I did it for a sense of moving the eye. And I do that with color a lot too. I try to move the eye, and I do it with wind. You know, everything's moving in a direction. And these are glazes. They're transparent colors on top of another transparent color, so you're looking through a color to see the color. It's kind of weird. It looks like blending, but there's no blending anywhere. It's a nice effect. It still takes time, but it's not mixing. People think are blending together.
It's a packed house when the show opens, and as Rabbett reflects on the last couple of days, he offers a bit of advice to up-and-coming artists.
Do your own thing, don't let, you know, but I copied, you know, up till 28 years old. I think it pays off. It took me 4 years to make the transition to get out of that, to stop erasing, don't erase so much, you know, just let it flow.
Did you know the city of Palm Springs, California is built on an Indian reservation? The Palm Springs area has been home to the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians for generations. Archaeological research has discovered that the Cahuilla have occupied Tahquitz Canyon for at least 5,000 years, mirroring the migration stories of the Cahuilla people. The Spanish called it Agua Caliente, which means hot water. The hot spring waters provided the Cahuilla with clean water, a place for bathing, and a connection point with a spiritual underworld populated by ancient sacred beings. The hot spring waters were also utilized for healing purposes. The ceremonial life of the Cahuilla was a rich one. Elaborate ceremonies marked every important milestone in life. Today, remnants of the traditional Cahuilla society exist, such as rock art, house pits, foundations, irrigation ditches, dams, reservoirs, trails, and food preparation areas. On May 15, 1876, portions of the land and the canyon were set aside by executive order of President Ulysses S. Grant as the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation. Visionary leaders of the Agua Caliente, such as the late Richard Milanovich, established economic development, museums for the preservation of Cahuilla history, and good relations with the city of Palm Springs.
The murder of Joe White is described as a gripping historical study about the decades-long struggle of the Ojibwe community at Rice Lake to resist removal to the Lakudere Reservation in Wisconsin. For author Eric Reddix, the story he researched brought a more personal understanding of American colonialism that spread across Indian country.
And this kind of culminates in the 1854 treaty, which ceded the land.
A book launch in the University of Minnesota Duluth Library is where professor and author Dr. Eric Reddix presents what he learned while researching the death of 19th century Ojibwe Chief Joe White.
Joe White became the chief of the community at Rice Lake, Wisconsin, which is about 50 miles south of the Lecouderay Reservation. And when he became the chief in 1878, the federal government wanted him and his community to remove to Lecouderay, to stay on the reservation. And he basically, from 1878 till his death in 1894, it was all about resisting that. And first it was the federal government that pushed that, then increasingly local settlers and local governments kind of pushed him to remain off the reservation. And the incident of the murder of Joe White, it's the state of Wisconsin. These are state game wardens who served Joe White with a warrant for his arrest for hunting off reservation, which you know, we have treaty rights that guarantee us these rights, and the state of Wisconsin was not recognizing these rights, so the judge issued this warrant for his arrest, and they sent him up there. And these two game wardens, in the course of arresting him, which is a very kind of contemporary story almost, claimed that, you know, he stepped back when they tried to arrest him, and they started beating him, and when he got away from the beating and ran away, they shot him in the back, fatally shooting him. So, so you can see how, like, you know, as I mentioned, all these different entities are involved with, you know, trying to get this man and his community to stay on the reservation where Indians belonged in their view. I grew up, and, you know, you hear about, you know, people like, you hear about, you know, Lakotas and Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and how they resisted the government, and you hear about maybe the Trail of Tears and how they were, you know, forced by bayonet to go to Oklahoma. And those are stories we're familiar with, but I was like, well, what was our story? Well, you know, why did people go to the reservation? Why would you do something like that? Why would you sign a treaty? Why would you, you know, leave your home and go to a reservation? It just didn't make sense to me without those big stories like we're familiar with the Lakota and the Cherokee. And, you know, that's kind of what pushed this. And, you know, what I found was very complicated, and it wasn't like a big federal government, you know, coming in with an army and doing something. It was, you know, sometimes the federal government was on the side of the Ojibwe and Joe White's community. Sometimes they were against it. Sometimes the timber company was you know, supporting what they were trying to do. But then, you know, the timber company also flooded our rice beds. So I mean, it's a complicated kind of thing, and you know, I have more answers now, but they're not, you know, they're not kind of, I guess, there's no real, like, super bad guy in the story. I mean, there's just these different forces that are kind of impacting Native people and Ojibwe people.
The Murder of Joe White has received critical acclaim for an in-depth analysis of a little-known event from Wisconsin history.
So they shoot Joe White, and you know, they just leave. They leave the scene, and it was about, you know, from the county seat of Washburn County, it was about I'd say about 15 miles on foot they walked, and they just left the body sitting there with his family. So I mean, kind of a really tragic thing, that short-term kind of image, you know, if you think about it. So they're eventually placed under arrest, and they stand trial 3 months later, at which they're found not guilty of manslaughter, and they're acquitted by an all-white jury, most of which were immigrants from Scandinavia, and they had a real similar view of Native people. And they also felt that, you know, Joe White himself and his community belonged on the reservation and away from them. His father, Nana Ungabi, was the leader from Lecouderay, probably the most prominent leader from Lecouderay, and arguably, I talk about in the book, probably one of the most influential in all of what later became Wisconsin. And he was really responsible for, he was the chief that kind of negotiated with the government during the treaties, and he often, you know, was at odds with the federal government. But he was such a charismatic leader that I talk about, you know, the Indian agent Henry Schoolcraft saying that, you know, having a lot of respect for him, even though a lot of times he was going against what Schoolcraft wanted him to do. So, but he meets a violent death right after the Treaty of 1854 is signed, which created the Lecouderay and other Lake Superior Ojibwe reservations. He's killed on the battlefield against the Dakota. So Nana Ungabi, his son, succeeds him, and this is Joe White's brother, Wabashashi. Wabashashi was a very different kind of leader, and he had a very more pragmatic approach, and he basically disassociates with the federal government and tries to build a relationship with settlers and the lumber company at Rice Lake. And he's the chief for 22 years, but, you know, during that time there was all these stresses on the community, the building of dams which flooded wild rice beds. You know, Rice Lake, Wisconsin, there's no rice on Rice Lake anymore. It's totally obliterated by the dam. So and that was an important food source for Ojibwe people, and so all that stress kind of culminates in Wabasheshe's assassinated in 1877, and then Joe White succeeds him, and 16 years later he meets a violent death.
Dr. Reddix hopes the takeaway for those in attendance is yes, this is Native history, but it is also Wisconsin history, and to a larger degree, it is American history.
I want people to know who these leaders are, their names. I mean, if you're a non-Native person, you live in Rice Lake, Wisconsin, you should know that there was a very significant leader named Nana Ungabi who lived here, and was the chief of a community for decades. And I didn't know about it growing up. And I think some of the descendants know of these people, but they don't really know their story, and especially they don't really know their personality. So that was my main kind of goal, is to have these people shine through, because even though we're in the 21st century, we still suffer from this thing where our history is so ethnocentric, and we know about George Washington, and we know about Abraham Lincoln, and we know their personality. And when I started writing this book, a few people knew Nana Ungabi or Joe White, well, nobody knew who Wabasheshe was, but people might know their name and know they were descended from a chief, and that's all they knew. And that was the minority of people. Most people didn't even know their names. So I'm hoping that this book kind of helps that, and helps to balance out that, yes, there were important, Native leaders, and there were important Native leaders besides the ones that we know about.
We all have stories to tell about who we are and where we came from. And even if we weren't listening directly when our grandparents were sitting around talking, or when our parents were visiting with family members or friends, I think those stories sink in when we hear them, almost subconsciously. Sometimes I think we have cell memory and recognize stories or remember stories. And I also think that having a direct connection to the land provides us with stories and inspiration. And all of that means that we have to sit still sometimes and just listen. So if I had to give advice to people who want to pursue some form of art, whether it's writing song lyrics, writing music, creating art quilts or paintings, doing quill work or traditional beadwork, any form of traditional art, that means that we have to be still and listen well.
One of the influential leaders in Southern California is the late Richard Milanovich, chairman of the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians. Tad Johnson interviewed Chairman Milanovich in Season 5 of Native Report. And that profile is this week's story from the Native Report archives.
The Agua Caliente Reservation and the city of Palm Springs, California, share borders different than most neighboring communities. Every other square mile is reservation property, creating a checkerboard pattern. Both communities see this as beneficial. Agua Caliente Chairman Richard Milanovich explains.
We have strived, and I think it's very important to let our membership understand, as well as the city understand, we're in this community jointly. What happens to us is going to happen in the same vein with the city or with our neighbors. So I say, if we can work together on any given issue, we'll all be that much better off. And I think the city understands that, the tribal members understand that. Naturally, there's times when we come to heads, we come to locks with one another, but by and large, we've learned how to work together. We have quarterly meetings with the city of Palm Springs. We've had semi-quarterly meetings with City Cathedral City and Rancho Mirage. We have another meeting with City of Palm Springs coming up where we sit down and talk about the issues that we feel are necessary to talk about in an open forum so everyone understands this is what we see as an issue, and it gives them the same opportunity to say, we see these as issues, can we somehow work out a workable, amiable agreement between all of us? And we have.
Palm Springs Mayor Steve Pugnier cited many instances as to how the two communities have benefited from this unique arrangement. He gave the welcome address of the 66th Annual Convention of the National Congress of American Indians.
Some of the things that we have done historically to show each other how important that partnership is, we've partnered on joint federal public lands highways grant applications, entered into agreements on design and constructions of actually bridges here in the city of Palm Springs. So I'm very proud to say the city of Palm Springs has this incredible relationship with the Agua Caliente Band of Indians, one that I think is a model for any other city and tribe out there in the country. That is how important it is to us.
It was 1977 when agreements were reached between the Cahuilla Nation and the local governments over issues mutually important to both parties.
Prior to that time, when the city had jurisdiction over our land, which is a big checkerboard, every other square mile is reservation, the other is fee, which was owned by the 7th Civic, and actually it was sold over the years, but individuals owned it. So what we had in the city of Palm Springs in the 50s, 60s, up to the 70s was a zoning map showing what Indian land as watercourse, Indian land as low density, Indian land as the bare minimal development which would be allowed, whereas right across the street, high density, high-end uses, commercial. From that time on, we've had the ability to control our own destiny. So again, by fate, by fortune, that's when we began to, within our own right, within our members' rights, to be one as we saw fit.
As with other communities in Indian country, tribal gaming has made a difference in Palm Springs.
It has changed the lives of our members inasmuch that it affords us the ability to venture out into other economic development. It affords us the ability to fund the education, to a larger degree, are funding our educational matters, our cultural identity. Education is so important to us. We had a scholarship program within the tribe prior to gaming, because we thought education was important to give our members an opportunity, give them a leg up if they so desire. We just are able to fund it even to a greater extent now and make it widely available to more members to give them a broader breadth of opportunities as far as education, not just your trade school, not just cosmetology or welding school. From the perspective of getting a higher education, but also getting a cultural education, understanding who better that you are from way back, not just from today, that you're a tribal member and you have maybe your tribe, one of your tribal businesses is a casino, but it goes much deeper than that. It's who you are, what you represent, and how long you've been representing that. And as you become of age and as you go forward, that will carry you with that self-esteem and that self-worth. That'll make you a better citizen, both from the tribal perspective as well as the community perspective, becoming an asset overall to this great community, to this great state, to this great country of ours. The economic development, we started a larger hotel downtown, on the edge of the reservation, Agua Caliente Hotel. It was a major facility that will be of a benefit for years to come, not just tomorrow, for years and years and years. It's setting the groundwork for additional development for us to use the resources that have been made available to us to the degree that we can better, again, not only ourselves, but the community.
Having the National Congress of American Indians come to his tribe's homeland is an honor for Richard Milanovich. He sees the event as important for all Indian people from across the nation.
Having NCAI here personally makes me feel very, very proud, and I know our membership is very, very proud. I know our council is very, very proud of having people from Indian people from across the country, including Alaska, visiting this great, our home, our Aboriginal home. And talk about, that's what's so important about NCI, is us coming together as a group of people and talking about what it means to be Indian, what it means to talk about the issues, the heartaches, the triumphs of what can be done. Next time NCI gets together, the people are coming together talking about how nice it is to be who we are and why we feel the way we do. It's a marvelous thing, Ted. It's not something that cannot be taken away. However hard others try to take it away from us, they can't. That's the great thing about unity. Staying together as one, and this is just another link as we build in that chain of life for Indian people. One more link, making us that much stronger. I'm very, very proud.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us at nativereport.org and Facebook. Thank you for spending time with us here on Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder.
Stacy Thunder is Ojibwe from the Red Lake and Lakota Ray Nations and is the Legislative Counsel for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Professor Tad Johnson is the Director of the Master of Tribal Administration and Governance program at the University of Minnesota Duluth and is an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux Community and the Blandin Foundation. Partial funding for this episode of Native Report is provided by the citizens of Minnesota through the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.